So the title of the talk is Patience Takes Courage. Some of you might recognise it from somewhere else. It's actually the title of a Sheikh Hamza talk from a few years ago. It's quite a short talk that he gave as a khutbah, but the subject is a little bit different. Obviously patience is patience, but he focused on a few things. I would recommend people listen to it because it is very interesting, and even though it's from a few years ago, it's still relevant. So do look it up. You can find it on YouTube. It's maybe 20-25 minutes. When I was thinking about this a while ago, just the nature of patience, I looked up a few things from the Quran, and then like people's understandings of it, like what did people say about patience in the past, how did they understood it. And one of the things that I found problematic, and this is a problem generally, is about how things get translated. So quite often we take things for granted with translations. Even with like really good translations, there are still some difficulties because there's always an element of subjectivity with translations. And I don't mean that people are deliberately or willfully trying to mislead others. Thank you very much. But in trying to move things from one language into another, you have to make some assumptions. And with this particular one, patience sometimes is translated from different Arabic words. So just so we're clear, what we're talking about here is sabr. Yeah, not something else, okay? And sabr comes up in the Quran and Hadith quite a lot. Apparently it comes up in the Quran over 70 times. Okay, it's mentioned, not just in that form, but in different forms. I say apparently, I haven't physically counted. Someone, if they want to do it, you're more than welcome, and let me know if it's 70 or 80 or whatever it might be. Okay, so just in terms of definition, it's important that we understand what we're talking about. So, patience, we're talking about sabr. So if I refer to patience, that's what I mean. It's mentioned a lot of times in the Quran. It's mentioned a lot of times in Hadith. It's also one of the 99 great names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You probably know more about that than I do. It comes up in a hadith as well from Ibn Masud radiallahu anhu, where he says that as-sabru nisful iman. Anyone want to translate that?
Patience is part of faith.
Yeah. So another issue with translation. I wouldn't translate iman as faith, but you know, it often gets translated. I'll just keep it as iman. It's difficult to translate. Okay. So however we understand that, as-sabru nisful iman. Okay, and then it goes on and it talks a little bit more about yaqeen being the whole of faith. So patience is often in the Quran and Hadith accompanied by other things. It's not always on its own, and the Quran does this a lot with particular concepts, but especially ones which are really important. So the fact that it comes up a lot in the Quran, maybe 70 plus times, it's mentioned lots in the Hadith, and then it's partnered with lots of other things as well. So here in that particular Hadith, it's partnered with yaqeen. So yaqeen as well, translated generally as certainty in one's faith. Okay, so however we try to understand that, just make that partnership between sabr and yaqeen. And then it also comes up, it's partnered with other things as well. So it comes up with partnered with taqwa, with good actions, a'mal. It comes up in terms of help, assistance. So wasta'inu bis sabri was salah. Okay, so it's partnered with salah, which is interesting as well. So Allah says, seek help through patience and salah. So that's, for me, an interesting one. We're not going to go into that one, but how do you seek assistance through sabr? How do you seek assistance through patience? That's something not for the scope of here. But something I you know, those of you that know me know that I like to get a bit of audience participation. Otherwise, you'll sit there and look at me, and I don't quite know if you're paying attention or not. So I want you guys to think about a time or or an event, it might not be personal to you, but preferably personal to you, where you think there's been a clear display of patience. Okay? Because how do we interpret it? Okay, it's one thing to say, okay, sabr is patience, but what actually is patience? Is patience waiting for a bus, which doesn't seem to come? Is it patience when, like, someone at home's taking ages to cook, and you're like dead hungry because you've come home from work, and you're like, is it waiting for your results from your finals because you have to wait like 2 or 3 months? Or is it something else? Is it all of those things? Is it none of those things? So I want you, just a couple of minutes, someone next to you, find someone you don't necessarily normally talk to come up with an event, either in your life or something that you know that's happened that you think is a good example of what patience actually is. Yeah? So just 2 minutes. I'll time it so it's not going in too long. Okay?
I can't relate to what Are you also define the word patience?
An example of what you think patience is. Could be from your life.
Oh yeah. You have to
Okay. So does anyone want to volunteer an example? Not you, because you're a troublemaker. Anyone?
Fasting.
Fasting? Okay.
Either announcement.
Yeah, quite a common one for everyone. Might be waiting for a pious wife to come along,
Yeah, that's hey.
and vice versa. Being ill and not getting the results, you're still getting ill all the time and not knowing what's happening.
Yeah, illness could be a good one over a period of time. Yeah.
Waiting for the barakah of your acts of worship, you know. Because Imam Shafi said he waited 60 years of tahajjud every night until he enjoyed it, you know.
Yeah. So there's lots of examples like within the Quran, particularly like from the prophetic stories about how long it takes them to do certain things. So one of the difficulties I think that we find with the prophet stories is that because they're told in a very linear fashion, this happened and this happened and this happened, we don't get a sense of the depth and the time of how long it took them to do the certain things. And only when you plot it out and start to talk about, okay, this prophet did this and then he went there and these people fought him, and it's like, it's not over a week or a month, it's over years. Okay, so the prophet himself, alayhi salatu wasalam, how long does it take him to get from the initial revelation to the Fath al-Makkah? How long's that?
A few years.
How many years? 2, 5, 10?
13.
Over 23 years.
Yeah, it's about 22 years. Okay? So look at all of the prophets' lives, okay, and they've got very particular missions, okay, but they don't know at the time that they're given revelation or whenever they're asked to do something what's going to pan out for them. It's easy for us, in retrospect, when we know their whole life, or as much of it as is revealed to us, for us to make sense of their lives because we know their whole life. Okay, we know when they were born, or something about when they were born. We know generally a little bit about when they received revelation or when they were commanded to do something, and then how long it took them to go through. In retrospect, even in our own lives, when something momentous happens and you look back at it and think, oh yeah, that happened because of X, Y, and Z, and if I hadn't gone there, then that would have happened. Life makes sense when you look at it in retrospect. It doesn't make sense when you're living it forward, and we live it forward. So when you're faced with choices, you don't necessarily know how it's going to pan out. You take the best means and the best judgment that you can take, knowing what your environment is and people around you and where you want to get to. But it doesn't always make sense. You don't know for certain how it's going to work out. So if you have a plan, you think, okay, it might take me 5 years to get there. It might take me 10 years. But sometimes we don't actually know. The prophets didn't know how long it would take them to get there. Did all of the prophets manage to convince their people? No. So what happened to people like Hud and Saleh? What happened to their people?
Later, some people they were destroyed one day because they were fornicating with each other.
Yeah, but they're not the only ones.
No.
There's lots of other ones. Okay, but even for prophets who were successful to varying degrees, I'm using that word slightly loosely because we don't know necessarily the nature of their mission. But Lut's also a good example because what happens within his family?
His wife. His wife.
So what happens with his wife?
Conspires against him.
She conspires against him. So he's got this incredible thing that's happening within his town, and someone from not just someone from within his family, someone who's probably closest to him, conspires against him. Right? So he's got this mission to do, and he's trying to get on with it. And the person that he's expecting, or we would probably expect to have close to us and supporting, works against him. Right? He's not the only one. What about who else has? So Nuh alayhi salam. Who doesn't?
His son and his wife.
His son drowns in the flood because he doesn't want to go with his father. Right. There's one in particular prophet is known for a story of patience or real tribulation.
Yeah.
There's lots of tribulations within all of the prophet's life. It's almost like, and this is my own understanding of it, is that every single one of them has a test of sabr. Okay, and the nature of it is different. Okay, because the environment that they're in is different. Their tests are different. Okay, because of all of these things that are going on. But none of them is quick. None of them. All right. Ayub's is incredible. I honestly cannot understand what is actually happening here, because he loses everyone and everything. Right, over a period of time. And not only does he lose everyone and everything, he also loses his health.
His health.
Right, so he's he's in a real state. Okay, and there's different narrations for him about how the people died within his family, how his house was lost, how all of his crops were lost, how all of his sheep and livestock were lost. But it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant, and it happens over a period. The loss happens very quickly, and he regains it over a long period. Okay, so it happens very quickly, and he regains it over a long period of time. You think about, for yourselves, for people that have wives, husbands, children, parents, friends, how long it takes to build up a relationship of any nature, and then think about how long it takes to build up a relationship which is meaningful and has trust, which is deeper than just your friends that you go to the park with or go to the cinema with. So he loses all of that in whatever it is, a matter of hours or a matter of days. So he has to build that all up, but he doesn't get it back straight away. There's a couple of other ones which are less well known, or seem to be less well known as well. So we don't know some of the prophets' lives, but someone mentioned Yusuf alayhi salam as well, and Musa alayhi salam. Musa's is really interesting because we all know, like, his test, his big mission was to go where? He had to go to? So Khidr's one bit, but who did he have to go and see to convince? Fir'aun. So if you had to take Fir'aun from centuries ago and put him into our society now, who would the equivalent, rough equivalent, I'm not saying we have a Fir'aun right now, but who would it be? No, within this country, who would it be?
Would it be Boris Johnson?
And I think it would be Boris Johnson.
On
It would probably be someone like the Queen, right? So who is Musa, alayhi salam, within that society at the time? Is he a diplomat? Is he royalty? Is he anyone
Steps. Stepson, isn't it?
of
Fir'aun.
adopted?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, but does he have status?
No.
So how does he get to see? It's like one of us saying, "Oh, you know what? Today, I'm going to go and see the Queen." How do you get to see the Queen? No, really, it is like that. How do you get to see the Queen? Do you write a letter? What do you do? I'm asking you seriously. What do you do? How do you get to see the Queen?
Find out where she is and just barge in, right?
Find it. You go down to the next person, someone intermediary between her and you.
Maybe, but why is he going to entertain you?
Has he got something to say?
What have you got to say to the Queen? Who are you? Who am I? Who's any of us that go and speak to the Queen? In one of the narrations, they say that Fir'aun went to the gate. So imagine you're going to Buckingham Palace every day for years, knocking on the gates and saying to the security guards, "I've got something to say." And the guards are looking at you like, "Who are you?" Just off you go. He's going every day for years just to get an audience, just to speak to him. He doesn't even know how he's going to happen, but he doesn't have any other means. So that's one of the narrations that talks about how does he actually eventually get in there. But years. What else is he going to do? There isn't another way.
Didn't he have a following of the people?
At that time, did he have a following? Or is that afterwards? Does he get people afterwards?
Yeah.
So he gets people afterwards, after he leads people out.
Yeah.
And what happens to those people?
They go astray again.
Okay, and what happens as a consequence of them going astray?
40 years spending in the desert.
40 years waiting in the desert. Right, they cannot enter the land that was promised to them because of the actions of a number of people from within that group. 40 years. Alright, so when you're waiting for your food and fasting, remember 40 years. Okay, 40 is a big number because it comes up quite a lot. Not just there, but in a number of different things. So the 40 years is also important because what happens over 40 years? Is it the same people that are staying there? Is it just them that cannot enter that land? Is it just them that have to wander?
He's part of it. He's part of it.
He's part of it, but who else?
His family.
His family, who else? Think about who you've got here with you and what you would be like in 40 years' time. Is it still just going to be you and your husband and your wife? Or is it's going to be the next generation? So the consequence of certain actions impacts people that come after you. Alright, so the Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked once about something he was doing, he said, "I'm not thinking about here and now. I'm looking at the next 7 generations." Okay, because he understood the consequences of actions here and now, the repercussions of that, not just for his children or people around him, but for 7 generations. This is a concrete example of that. So for 40 years, those people, whoever was born in that 40 years, had to succumb to that because there was nothing else that they could do. So for us, we sometimes find ourselves in situations where you think, I haven't deserved this, I haven't earned this, but you're in that situation anyway. You cannot change that. It's something that, I've forgotten his name. There's a philosopher, a recent philosopher, 20th or 19th century philosopher, who talked about the fact that there are certain things in our lives that we do not choose. Okay, and the things that we do not choose, like where we're born, who we're born to, that is nothing to do with anything that we've earned. Right? He calls that thrownness. So the fact that many of us might have been born here in England, right, in a society which, despite its faults and difficulties, is safe and stable, right? You don't have to worry about the threat of war or poverty so much. You know, there are elements of that. But what did you or me or any of us do to deserve that? Okay, why are we chosen to be in this situation in this country here and now? As opposed to being in, choose anywhere in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, where you have the daily threat of like war, kidnap, or torture. We didn't do anything. Okay, so sometimes we benefit, some humans benefit and some don't. Okay, we don't know why that is. All right, but to understand something about what our purpose is, we have to understand something about, we have to accept our situations. All right, because some situations are given to us, our thrownness, and some situations we earn, and some situations are earned by people that came before us, like the 40 years. Okay? But we find ourselves wherever we find ourselves, and we have to deal with that as best we can. And saying it's not fair, it's not fair. Who cares if it's not fair? You're here, you're now, you've got to deal with it.
Is that destiny then?
It's part of qadr, isn't it? Because Allah has decreed that. He could have put you anywhere in the world at any time. He could have made one of us from the Sahaba, but He didn't, because we're here and we're now. Right? He could have made us people that went to the moon. All right, and I don't think anyone's an astronaut.
Okay.
So we have to deal with whatever the here and now is. Okay, accept what it is, recognize it for what it is. The reason that we have to understand and recognize that is because whatever situation we find ourselves in, we might not like it. Okay, so you might be born into a particular type of family, you don't appreciate the kind of culture that you're from, but you've still got to embrace it to some degree. To get to a different point, you have to have a plan. All right, so wherever you find yourself and wherever you want to get to, that bit in the middle needs a plan and it needs work. And that is the work that the prophets had to undertake, and that's what they had to do. So whether it takes a month, if it takes 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime, that's what we're all having to do. And for me, that's how I understand the bit about patience. Okay, for us, generally. Within that, there might be specific things that you have to do. You might have to deal with tragedies in your family. You might have to deal with difficult things that come up. That's just the nature of life. Okay, but you might still have a mission that you have to undertake. You will still have a mission that you have to undertake despite all of these other things coming into your life and going out. So I'm sure there's people that, you know, we all know that we would prefer that aren't in our lives, that causes a bit of difficulty, that actually you don't really get along, but they're there and you have to deal with them come what may. Right? But it doesn't detract from the fact that you're here, you're now, you've got something to do, and it's going to take you time to get there. Were there any other examples of, can you think of any other examples from prophets' lives? Maybe that are shorter in time. Yeah, so what happens for people's benefit? So the Prophet ﷺ in Taif, what happens to him?
So he goes to it's a particular time in his life. It's when Khadija, she passes away. and also Abu Talib. He also passes away in that sort of period, and then he goes to die for some form of strength, to get some strength and some allegiance to help his cause. And instead of finding allegiance, he's actually pelted. The people of the town send their children to pelt him with stones.
Mhm.
And it's an incredible time for him. And then he makes this wonderful dua which shakes the arsh, as it says, of Allah. And his feet are bleeding, he makes this dua. And then the angel said that the angel came to say, look, we can crush these people between the two mountains. And then our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, look, maybe, and this was an amazing, not just patience, but something far beyond comprehension actually. And he says, maybe their children would be of those who follow me. And this is just goes beyond patience, I suppose. But at that point of pain,
Do you think that that's patience, or is it something else? Is it a sort of recognition of the situation?
I think it's everything. I think it's patience as well. I think it's patience on a different level, because it's when the angel comes and you're bleeding and you've just been pelted, you need a certain amount of special patience to say, well, look, you know what? These people have done this to me. I don't want any retribution on them, but I have patience to think that their children will be of salih, will be good. So that's patience on steroids, if you like. You know, it's of a different, can't even imagine. And it was patience because of that situation, because his beloved wife had passed away. Abu Talib had passed away as well.
So there was lots of things that happened in that year, or in that time, that compromised his ability to do what he needed to do. And that was one of the things that really stood out, I think, for a lot of people. Not just then, but obviously later when you look at his life, alayhi salatu salam. So I think that's a good point, because I think it's when calamity befalls, our reaction to it determines something about how we are and our level of patience. So when something terrible happens, do we react angrily? Do we react with some sort of violence or some triggered response? Or do we think, actually, hang on a minute, I need to work out what's actually happening. How does that balance with everything else that's going on in my life and everything else that I need to do? So that as a form of patience, like in the moment, how you react is one, I would say, is one form of patience. And then patience over time to deal with something in a planned way to get from a point A to point B, whether it's a year, a month, or 10 years.
It's like the 13 years in Makkah, where there was no war. He withstood the advances of Quraysh, our Prophet and his community.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't retaliate. There were certain instances.
I think there's lots of instances, not just in the Prophet's life himself, but in all of the Prophet's lives. And I'm sure the reason for asking the question was try and think about these things within your own lives, because you can probably find them, even if not in yours directly, but in your family's lives. There are always things that you have to overcome. And even if, like, your own thrownness doesn't put you in a situation where, you know, you're having to battle every day, think about where you would like to get to, and that will take patience as well. So whether it's learning a new skill, whether it's doing something for your family, being able to put them in a situation that they don't have to maybe fight in the way that you did. Okay, all of these things take time, and that is a type of patience. Okay, the reason that it takes courage is because in that period, you're going to have to change things. You can't carry on doing the things that you were doing before. And what happens when you try to change? At what point in the Prophet's lives do they get adversaries? At what point do they become demonized within their own communities? Not other people's communities, their own. It's when they start to change what they did. Okay, it's when they start to bring a message that perhaps hadn't been heard in that place before. And that's typical human behavior. It's typical of human behavior. Okay, that when you change, whether it's for good or bad, people will always find fault, or they will find something to pick up on it. So it might be that someone wants to change something really bad about themselves. Okay, they might have a horrible habit, and let's be honest, these are horrible habits are not things which befall people without belief only. Okay, it might be that someone has an addiction. How do you change that? It doesn't. For most people, you cannot go cold turkey. You have to do something over a period of time. Okay. If you're in a situation where you're trying to change that, people around you are not going to react very well, because they are going to be the types of people that are helping you. They're your social buddies within that sort of addictive behaviour. Okay, so all of a sudden it's challenging them. Right? Why would you do that? Come on, just once more. Let's go out. Let's do this. Let's do something else. Don't do that. It's kind of, oh, you've changed. All right. But it might not be anything as material as an addiction. It might be something that you want to practice more, but maybe your family isn't practicing that much. So then you're going to have to take a position at some point and say, actually, this is more important to me than all of those other things that are going on. So we have to be ready for the fact that those things will come up within a period of time. So recognizing what our throwness is, where we are at the moment and where we want to get to, are key to setting a plan and getting to that plan. There's something from the Quran I should have asked at the beginning, actually. Who knows what's the beginning line of the last ayah in Surah Baqarah? La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha, which means
No social.
Who shall bear thick and take.
okay, so no soul
Should bear more
shall
than
bear more than it is capable of bearing. So it's important to remember this when setting out on something new, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't put a challenge greater than you're capable of bearing upon you. So even though something might seem extremely difficult or even insurmountable, you can't figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to deal with these people around me? How am I going to tell these people that, think about it for converts, how am I going to tell my Hindu or Sikh parents that this is what I want to do? These are major things, they're not minor things. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. What it means is that you have the capability of doing it. But it might not be a capability then and there. You might have to do some work in order to get to a position where you can actually undertake this fully. So for example, can a 10-year-old who's good at physics take a physics degree? Generally. No. Why? Because they haven't got the mental faculty to do it. They haven't got the prerequisite knowledge. They're going to have to go through that period of middle school, probably GCSEs. Maybe they can accelerate it. Maybe they can do physics GCSE at 12 if they're particularly good. But even then, it's not at 10. You've still got to go through it. You still have to do that work. You still have to recognise that it takes time to get from a point and another point. And that's in an area where it's very well mapped out. But what about in areas where it's not? Or you don't know how it's going to go? Everyone knows how school works. You enter at 6 or 7, and you come out at 16 or 18, and then maybe you go to university. It's well mapped out. But what about when it's not, when no one's done it before? That's why La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha is so important. To recognise that, to remember it, and say it can be done. I'm just not sure now how it might be done. How am I going to do this? Has anyone done it before? How did they do it? Telling people to be patient in adversity is no advice. because the nature of the challenge is one that needs patience. So saying to someone, I've got married, who comes to you and says, I've got major difficulties with my wife or my husband, be patient, that's not advice. You need to know what specifically is going on so you can tell them specifically how to resolve it. But there's a lot of that happens. So when someone comes to you and says, just be patient, it's not advice. Okay, for things that need practical steps. All right, if someone says to you, if you're fasting and you're like, I'm hungry, you're going to have to wait. All right, you're just going to have to wait. That's just how it works. All right. You do your GCSEs in June. Oh, I really want to know what I got. You're going to have to wait. That's how it works. There's no practical steps. Just wait 2 months. You get your results in August. But if you've got a problem in your marriage, how am I going to resolve that? Say be patient, just wait. It's not going to work. You have to have practical steps. So recognize the situation that you're in, recognize where you want to get to, and take and find out what those steps are that you need to. But be courageous with it. So 3 things that I just wanted to summarize on was, remember that the ayah from the Quran, La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Okay, recognize where you are and where you want to get to. And the bit in the middle will take time and it will take patience, but it needs a plan. It needs a plan, right? And you are going to probably have to be courageous to see it through from start to finish. If you start it and stop, then you fall back and you're in a worse position than you were before. Because now your nafs is kind of like, yeah, we told you were rubbish. Don't even bother. Yeah, because that's what the nafs is programmed to do. So if you need people around you to help you develop something, then get those people. Don't start out on something which isn't going to, which you could have planned better or you could have resourced better, and then not be able to follow it through because you didn't plan it properly. Again, whatever it might be, a year, 5 years, 10 years. How did Yusuf alayhi salam get from being in a well, left for dead, to being one of the highest ranked people of Egypt? He didn't know what was going to happen. Right? That's why, one of the reasons why Sabr is partnered with Yaqeen, because he had trust at that point. He didn't know how he was going to get there. Sometimes your situation doesn't allow you to make a plan. I'm stuck in a well. What am I actually going to do? I'm probably going to die. So you hand over your affair to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's nothing else you can do. Then what happens? You get sold into slavery. There's nothing I can do. He gets imprisoned. There's nothing I can do. Not nothing. He can still make dua. He can still have yaqeen. So recognize the type of situation you're in. Can you affect it? Yes. Plan. Recognize where you are. Recognize where you want to get to. Have the courage to see it through. Am I in a position where I can affect it? No. Allah's put you there. Give it to Him. Alhamdulillah. Any questions?
So in Islam, you know how we have definitions and things. So how does Islam define the word patience?
Honestly, I don't know. So something like sabr, you probably have to look up. So lots of these things don't have uniform interpretations.
I'm talking about in the realm of, say, logic, for example. When they say what is art, so in logic, it's defined as imitation. That's the root. You know, that's the essential definition of.
But who came up with that definition?
It comes up in that's what they teach you in logic.
That someone must have come up with that definition. So there's always an element of subjectivity, because it's people saying this is what I think it is. That's why it's a little bit problematic, and that's why translations become doubly problematic, because you're taking the translator's view of someone who had a subjective or somewhat subjective view of it, and then saying this is how I think this is translated, or how we should translate it. So, for example, patience is problematic because patience existed as a word before sabr was translated as patience. So patience in English has ideas related to Christianity, to Judaism, to the society as a whole. So when we take it from sabr to patience, do we lose things or do we gain things in patience that sabr never had? And it's a problem with all of the major conceptual words. So Imam Ghazali, I think, says that patience is recognizing that things have their time and there's no haste in it. I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly what he says. But he and Ibn Taymiyyah had lots of arguments about things like this, saying, how do you define certain words? So, and depending on, who you favour and what school people follow, you might favour one or the other. But as a broad concept, it's about recognising that the two things that we discussed, at a point in time when tribulation hits, what's your reaction? If your reaction is reactive, I'm going to kill him for doing that. All right, that's not patience, that's reactive. If it's, hang on, what just happened? Let me work out what I'm going to do. That's more akin to patience. Ghazali, I looked up a lot of his definitions. That's how he would look at that in that particular moment. And over time, it's understanding that things take time to ripen. You don't pick a fruit before it's ripe, because it could be poisonous. You have to recognise what the period of time is. What does a fruit look like when it's ripe? Okay, and every fruit is different.
Question. How do you differentiate between patience and hopelessness?
Two are opposite though. By not being patient, you feel hopeless.
Patience is waiting for something positive.
So I think patience is about having a plan, okay, over a period of time. Hopelessness is a feeling of maybe being overwhelmed or giving up and saying there's nothing that can resolve this. Okay, so in the two situations that I've outlined, and I'm not saying that those are definitive or the only things that could ever happen. We've got 25 minutes to talk about something here. I'm sure that there's people out there that could give advice to specific situations. So whatever I say is going to be generalized. But hopelessness is the absence of any sort of... It might be the absence of a plan, I don't know the specifics. Okay, or a feeling of being so overwhelmed that you don't see any way out. And there are different reasons why people might feel like that. It might be that somebody's depressed, for example. People that are depressed tend to have lots of feelings of hopelessness. This can never get better. My life is rubbish. How am I going to resolve this? There's no way out. They often cannot see that there are steps to resolve it. And it might take time. And that's the thing, I think, in our society here and now, is that if things don't get resolved quickly, we think they can't be resolved. Right, it takes 9 months for a baby to be formed. And everyone sees that every day. 9 months. How long does it take for a human to fully grow? How long? To get from the point of birth to being fully physically, like all your bones are fused, is somewhere between 14 and 21 years. There's no other animal like that. And that's nothing to do with mentality. Okay, because people always learn. So the point is, there are very concrete examples within our everyday life of the fact that it takes a long time for certain things to mature. We're not ready. We're not ready to accept some of those things sometimes. Again, I'm talking generally.
When does Islam recognize you as an adult? At what age?
So there's a general idea that people are considered youth until 40, but in terms of legal responsibility, when you have to start praying, it's at the point that you're baligh. So there isn't a definitive age. It's about when those signs are met, and for females and males they're different. the signs are different, and the ages can be different within a gender. So typically for men it's somewhere between 11 and 15. For females it could be earlier, so they say you can't really be baligh before 9. But females tend to mature physically and from a sort of baligh point of view earlier than men.
Is it worth saying, Robert, that patients, it's like what you said when somebody is in difficulty, and you say have sabr, that doesn't normally sit well, not knowing the full situation, because it's not a remedy in itself. As you said, you need to know the minutiae, you need to know the nuances. What are those specifics in order to have the sabr? Sometimes you may not know, but there are other things that help you along the way. I just talk from a personal perspective, that yes, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know where things pan out. But Allah has given us things along the way to hold on to, if you like. Things like our prayer, salah, and to do adhkar. So there are things that help us to, because patience isn't something that is just thrown on you. It's something that's developed, and it can be nurtured, and it can be brought home by engaging in certain things.
So we started off like looking at like pairings. So Wasta'inu bis sabri wa salah.
Yeah.
So sabr and salah, seek help through these two things. So absolutely. Have to use the salah well. Have to think about, what verses do you want to recite? Which means that you have to understand what they mean. Why were they revealed? What du'as can you use? These things are there, but I don't think, and it's not necessarily the fault of individuals, I'm not sure that that's always well taught. Like, if you're in a particular situation, what du'as can I use over a period of time? How much do I need to do? But the other side of that is that sometimes people do get given good advice, but it's difficult to implement. Or they find it difficult to implement. So then there's an excuse, and then it becomes compounded. Because then you're in a situation it's like, I've got a problem, I went to someone, they gave me good advice, but I'm not doing it. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you something to remedy the problem, and you haven't done anything with it. So you're accountable for that as well. So, but I think absolutely understand a little bit about that. I can't set people homework, I'm not going to be able to mark it. But have a look at what sabr is partnered with. Where does it come up? Why does it come up? Alright? So when we read the Quran, we start to think, okay, those two things are together. Why are they together? Why is it with taqwa? Why is it with yaqeen? Yeah? What kind of examples can demonstrate the fact that sabr goes with yaqeen? Yusuf alayhi salam could be one. Yeah? Taqwa as well. Having an understanding of where you're going to get to in the future.
Some such questions from someone downstairs. We know from the Quran that Allah will not put the burden on someone that they don't have the strength to bear. But if we have too much on our plate and have taken on too much, what if we carry on as we feel that if it was too much, then we shouldn't have been put in that situation, so we must bear it?
If you take things on beyond what you can bear, is that Allah doing it, or is it you?
It's not.
No, I'm asking as a response, because the question is, if you take lots of things on, okay, understand what your limits are, what you're capable of doing. Okay, if you invite, there was in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a man that came to him, so he was a Sahaba, right, at that point, and he asked for the Prophet ﷺ to make dua for him for wealth, for great wealth. And people know this. And so the Prophet ﷺ said to him, he warned him and said, are you sure that, the specifics of what you've asked for, that you want me to ask? He said, yeah, absolutely. And over time, once the dua was made, this guy became further and further and more distant to like the Prophet ﷺ and all of the Sahaba, because he was so consumed by all of the business and the wealth that he was accumulating. I can't recall exactly what happened to him at the end. But the point is, it puts a distance between you. We have to be really careful about the things that we ask for, because dua is a weapon for good and for not good, right? And we can actually incriminate ourselves when we ask for things that we don't really understand.
He wouldn't give zakat.
He wouldn't give zakat.
And then he came after the Prophet passed away.
Yeah, no, Abu Bakr Siddiq came to him for the zakat as well.
And he wouldn't give it. Yeah. No, thank you. I remember that. So I'll give you an example of someone taking something on and not really understanding. There's a brother that I know, and by his own admission, he had some unpleasant characteristics and behaviours, right, over a period of time. But Allah had made him physically very fit and handsome, right? And he said to me, I need to make dua to get rid of these bad characteristics, but I know that Allah has favoured me with physical characteristics. And he was, alhamdulillah, quite intelligent as well. And he didn't just come to me, he was asking in a group, which is how I know about this. He said, what kind of things can I ask? And no one really understood exactly what he was asking for. I'm not really sure you want help with those things. Okay, ask for help, but go and seek help for the things that you've got problems with. So he came back sometime later and was saying, I don't really think that I got helped. And so someone said to him, well, explain what happened. He said, well, this was the situation, and Allah has given me akal, and He's given me strong, firm body, but I've got these issues. And he said, I made a dua along the lines of, Allah, make my character as beautiful as you've made my body. I'm like, okay, so what happened? He goes, well, I was expecting my character to become beautiful. He goes, but what happened was I started to lose my hair. I'm like, okay. He said, so actually, his character's here, and his physical stature's here, and he was expecting this to rise. But what happened was this came down. Yeah, so he started to lose some of his strength, he started to lose some of his hair. I said, well, what did you specifically ask for? And he couldn't remember. But how you phrase things, what you ask for, is really important, and that's why it needs a bit of wisdom, a little bit of thinking. That's anecdotal. I don't know that everything that he told us was true. But it serves a purpose to understand. We all need to think about what it is that we ask for, because sometimes we get answered in a way that we weren't expecting because we asked a very specific question, or perhaps not specific enough.
There's another question from downstairs. Okay, what advice can one give to parents who are challenged with their children growing up? How can one display patience?
I've only got one child. I'm not sure I can answer. People with lots of children might want to answer that a little bit better. It's difficult because I think parents have very strong expectations of their children. I see it a lot with, in sports in particular, like dads who wanted to be footballers. They want their sons to become footballers because they couldn't do it. And so they drive them hard, relentlessly, and they're totally unreasonable. Totally unreasonable. That's at one extreme. Okay, but the same thing happens in sort of deen-related things. You want your child to be, I don't know, a doctor, an engineer, whatever it might be, but they might just not incline towards it. They might not be academic enough. It's about trying to understand, where are the children? What are their strengths? What are they good at? And what do they like? Quite often the things that children like within what's halal are things that they will flourish in if the right environment and encouragement is given. That's my personal experience from it. Flogging children into doing something over and over again, it sometimes works. But sometimes it doesn't. It causes rebellion or resentment. from people who have more children than me, they might want to add something. I don't know, whoever asked the question, they might want to ask people around them. Because it's not necessarily about patience. It might be about wisdom, just about what is it that you want from them? What do you expect from them? I don't think it's necessarily about patience. Okay. Shukran to all of you. I would say that remember the du'as. Use the du'as that are in the Quran, particularly at the end of Surah Baqarah, okay, for what you need. Because there aren't stronger du'as than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed for His creation. Okay, but be careful about what you use, why you use it, and when. Okay, because we know that there are even specific times in the day and night where things are answered, okay, or are better for us to seek His proximity. Okay, so think about what you need, how you can ask for it, when you can ask for it. Remember, la yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha, and make a plan if you need to make a plan. But be clear about where you want to get to, and be reasonable with yourself. Don't beat yourself up if it doesn't happen after a day, a week, a month, a year. Some things take a long time. Yeah. Sure.
Fatiha is a beautiful recipe.
I'm not one for making lots of collective dua, so if people want to make dua for themselves, use this time to make dua for yourselves, for your family, for people, for myself. Please.
Could everyone please make dua for one of our helpers? His name is Mergen. He's helped us a lot in the past. And unfortunately, his sister was in a car accident last week, and she's in a coma. And the day she had the accident, her parents who were going to see her, had a car crash as well. Alhamdulillah, the parents are okay, but she's still in a coma, and he's finding it, being back home and him being here, he's finding it very difficult. And at the moment, he actually needs a lot of patience and courage to get through these difficult times. So please, if you can remember him in your du'as as well.
What's his name?
Mergen.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, all of you.